What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 420 of Opinions May Vary. I am your host, JR. I'm co-host with me, Alex.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm great.
That's just so good to hear. When you talk to a lot of people these days, and you say, "Hey, man, how are you?" You don't get a lot of, "I'm great."
No.
And that's just, it's nice to hear. It's nice to hear your voice. I missed you. And we're going to have some fun today. We are joined by a special guest. They are the founder of LionWing Publishing. We're going to get into the actual what is LionWing Publishing in a moment, but we are joined today by Bradley Halestorm. Bradley, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
This is I'm kind of jazzed for this one. Alex typically, like, the way we go. Alex is our scout. He finds the interesting people to talk to, and he'll usually drop it on me. He'll drop a couple "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this?" And Alex sent me a couple. And there's one in particular, I was like, that one's really cool. And he got back to me later. He's like, okay, we have someone lined up. And when he told me who it was, that was the one that I really wanted to talk to. So Bradley, I'm pretty excited for this because you do cool stuff. And I'm going to kick off with that. We mentioned LionWing Publishing. Do you have the quick elevator pitch for the listeners at home who might not be familiar with your work? What is LionWing Publishing? What do you do?
Yeah, for sure. So the 30-second spiel is we are a localization and publishing company focused on bringing Japanese tabletop games to the West. So that's kind of our specialty. We've been around since 2018. I guess I incorporated the company in December 2017, so technically 2017. But we didn't get rolling until mid-2018. That's when we launched our first Kickstarter, and then we followed that up with two more in 2020. So, 2020 was a weird year. But for LionWing, it was sort of a jumping off point of where I was really able to focus on the business and take it from kind of something I did on the side to something more full time. So 2020, weird year, but an okay one for LionWing. Thanks for having me. And I'm excited to talk more about what LionWing does. We sort of fill a very kind of strange void. We definitely have a niche about us. And I'm excited to talk about that.
The tabletop scene, at least from someone like myself, my point of view, who I kind of just got into tabletop. So to someone like me, it feels like tabletop is just exploding nowadays. We go to various conventions back when conventions were happening, and it feels like the tabletop area in a lot of those conventions, especially the gaming centric ones, has been growing more and more over the years. They've been attracting bigger crowds. We've definitely seen conventions in the past with tabletop areas, and it's kind of I don't want to say barren, but there weren't a whole lot of people there. But now it seems like the industry is booming. So now with companies like LionWing bringing games that typically aren't really available to the everyman, kind of like me and Alex, what kind of challenges does this bring? I mean, I imagine it's a lot more difficult than just opening up Google Translate and just plugging in, the instruction manual and then printing and going from there.
Yeah, well, I wish it was as easy as opening up Google Translate and then printing the manual and going from there. That would make my life so much less stressful. It's an interesting side of the industry to occupy. So you are right. The board game biz has just exploded in the past 6 years, and especially in the past 3 years. Which is really heartening to see as a longtime board gamer. Obviously, that's fantastic to see because I've been there through the years when it was not a very popular medium. But so I'm glad it is now, and I'm glad that it's thriving. But it's a crowded marketplace, and so part of LionWing, when I formed the company, part of it was, me trying to figure out how I can differentiate ourselves from a lot of other companies. And so that's part of why I chose the localization route. In addition to, I had been in video games localization for a number of years at that point. So it's something that I feel passionate about. But so it's a lot more challenging than just throwing some words into Google Translate and going from there. A print-based medium is interesting when you're doing localization. I mean, really when you're doing anything, but especially localization. There are so many ways to misinterpret another language, but there are also so many ways to misinterpret another language that are talking about rules to a game that have to be very precise. It's not like the video game industry of localization where, if you mess up a translation, you can issue a quick patch, you can update it real quickly, and no one's the wiser, and that's that. But in a print-based medium, you get one shot at getting things right, especially when you're a smaller company like LionWing, when we don't have the luxury of necessarily getting a second print run. So our first print runs have to be, perfect. And so that element of this side of the industry is probably the most stressful part of being a company such as ourselves. And there are a couple other companies that do what we do. And I think we all would agree that it's pretty challenging. Anyone who's translated a board game into any language will tell you that you've got to get the semantics just right. You've got to get your wording just right. And then you've got to play test the hell out of it to make sure that you didn't misinterpret something along the way. Yeah. And so it's a complex process. It's a very complex process, and one that has to be accomplished with a level of laser precision, which is also part of what's really fascinating and really exhilarating about it to me. Knowing that we get no second chances is kind of it's stressful, but it's also kind of a cool part of the job, because I know that we always have to be performing. You can never have an off day when you are localizing and then editing a tabletop game and then play testing it and making sure everything's right. And so yeah, it's definitely it's been a cool journey thus far. Like I said, 2020 is when we really kind of kick things into high gear. And I'm excited for what 2021 brings in this industry and for LionWing. But certainly the same challenges that have always been around for LionWing will be around in 2021. I would just say that we've gotten better about knowing what our process is, what our QA process is, what our localization process is, what our editing process is. And so we've been able to refine that over the past couple of years, which is part of why I'm excited for 2021, because I think right now we're kind of the best we've been thus far. And that's exciting to be able to offer that to consumers, and to be able to give them a certain level of confidence that when you back our games, because we're mostly a Kickstarter company, that you're getting a certain level of quality with us, that we've been able to refine over the past couple of years. And certainly there have been people around in the game far longer than us that have a way more streamlined process than we do. But I can't speak for them. I can only speak for what I know. And I know that we've come a long way in the past 2 years or so, and we're only getting better.
So as you were describing this and going over having to get it right, I'm just now realizing what that means game-wise. It's not just text. It's not just interaction or a description of the guns and gun. It's game mechanics. It's having to find the right words for actions or items or weapons. And then how there's plenty of people making games just in English who have trouble figuring out just what wordage to use for how to play the game. And now you have to take what's already established and figure out what'll work with that here in the West.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, those folks who are, let's say, designing and publishing games natively in English, those designers know their game, and they know what the game is supposed to do. We're taking someone else's work, and certainly we have very, very, very close communication every step of the way with the designers. But at the end of the day, it's not our game. We didn't come up with it. I wasn't in their head when they were making it. And so there's a level of complexity that's present in localization in this industry that's not there for folks who are not localizing board games and instead are just producing, board games in their native language. It's amazing, how quickly you can break a game with a misinterpretation or the usage of a single small word. If you use the word can instead of may in a competitive card game, when the card was supposed to say may, you can effectively break your competitive card game, and now no one wants to play your card game because it's not competitive any longer.
Right.
Or you've got to issue some sort of update or an FAQ or whatever. But nevertheless, so when I talk about laser precision, that's not meant to sound like hyperbole. It's true, because if you're off just slightly, so is your game, and then you've just shipped a broken game. And you might be able to get away with that once, but folks aren't going to come back a second and third time of a second and third broken game.
I'm just kind of still blown away by this. To someone like me, it seems like such an ordeal and a challenge to do this kind of thing. Like 2 years ago, we're big fans of PAX, the Penn Arcade Expo. We live near Boston, so we go to the Boston show, PAX East. And I remember someone was doing a demo of Root in the Kickstarter lounge. And it was like someone who works for the company that makes the game. So they know this game. And like I did a 2-hour demo with me and a couple friends of ours, friends of the show. I had no idea what I was doing. Maybe I'm just bad at Root. It's very possible. It was early in the morning. I could just be bad at the game. And that was someone, the game was designed for the West. I had someone who helped create the game, explaining it to me, and even then I was struggling. I can't imagine what it would be like to try and take something that's in a different language, and then bringing it over here, and kind of making it for us. It just blows my mind, especially at the pace with which you work. Because in looking into the products that you have made, and especially having backed things in Kickstarter in the past, I know a lot of people, like people who put out books, even sometimes games. Usually you get like one a year. Like, okay, I'm doing another Kickstarter for this project, and like that's not the same with you. You did what, 3 alone in 2020?
Yeah, man. 2020 was a crazy year in so many regards, that being one of them.
So you put out three different games that you localized and released on Kickstarter. The most recent being Gun and Gun, which according to the Kickstarter website was funded in 7 hours. Which, I mean, hats off. That's amazing.
I take issue with that. So this is a quick little anecdote. Sorry to
no, do it up. I'd love to hear the bits.
So technically, the campaign was funded in 6 hours, but our graphic designer put 7 and threw it up on the Kickstarter, and people had already seen it. And I was like, oh, well, I can't take it down now. That's going to look like I'm trying some sneaky stuff. So I always cringed a little bit when I saw that campaign header, like, well, actually it was 6 hours, not 7 hours, but I'll go with it. That's fine. So yeah, I just had to throw that in there because the graphic designer and I had a laugh about that, because I was like, no, 6 hours. What are you doing? Like, come on. Let's present ourselves in the best light possible. But right. Yeah, it was a quickly funded game is I think what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say if it was you earned that banner. If you wanted to put up 6 hours, I wouldn't bat an eye at it. But I mean, congratulate that's amazing. It seems to be that people dig what you do, which is what it comes down to is just making things for people who want to play games. Let's talk. Man, I don't even know which one. Let's talk about the upcoming. I think that's the most prudent. We should get to that while we have the time. Because not only did you have the 3 games come out in 2020, 2021 just barely started. We're 15 days into it right now, and you've already got another project coming up. What's going on with the latest?
Yeah, so we are launching our next Kickstarter in February for a game called Embryo Machine, which is a tactical mecha combat board game from a Japanese design group called Kozaic. They're sort of veterans of the industry. They've been around for about a decade, produced some really big works, and have even more works in Japan that they've produced that have never made its way to the West. But yeah, we're really excited about this project. It's different than anything else that we've done. So we've mostly stuck to card games. And by mostly, I mean That's all we've done. Our 4 projects to date have all been card games of some kind. They've been different types of card games, but they've nevertheless been card games. This game is not that. I mean, it is card driven, but it's a tactical game, which means it comes with pieces that you're moving around on a board. The board itself is a modular board where you're able to kind of mess with the terrain a little bit, and you're socketing in other bits of combat pieces and the like. And so it's very different than anything that we've done, which was super exciting to me. You know, when I'm looking for the next project, I never really want to produce the same game twice. The game can, 2 games can occupy the same space, and as long as they approach that space differently, it's fair game in my mind. But my big thing is I want games to feel different. I want them to look different. So if you look back at our catalog of games thus far, they all look pretty different. Like Gun and Gun, which is a very Ghost in the Shell, Blade Runner, Alita, Battle Angel inspired aesthetic, looks very different than our previous project, Kradia Wild Hunt Festival, which has got a sort of wilderness, Monster Hunter, Atelier series vibe, which then looks different from Testament, which is a very Final Fantasy XIV looking game, which is very different from Sinome Coliseum, our first game, which is very chibi inspired, very cute family party game. So I like the aesthetic to be different, and I like the games to play different. And so Embryo Machine looks very different, and I love mecha. I mean, hell, in our logo is a mecha. I love that genre of anime and manga, and I wanted to make sure that at some point LionWing had a mecha game under its belt. But I didn't want it just to be any mecha game. It had to be a good one. And so Embryo Machine in Japan is a really popular game. They're actually coming out with their 3rd expansion this year. So it's done well enough to earn itself 3 expansions, but it's also done well enough to spawn the Embryo Machine board game that we're bringing to Kickstarter in the first place, because the series actually started off as a tabletop RPG back in 2009 and went on to spawn, I don't know, like 6 additional expansion and supplement books in that TRPG. And then they got feedback from players like, yo, this game's really good. You should just make a board game about the combat. And they were like, you know what? We should. And so they did. And so I played Embryo Machine about a year and a half ago and put it on my short list of games that I want to look into more deeply. And then after I kind of looked at my short list in early 2020, about a year ago, and started really playing those games myself to figure out if I even liked playing them. Because if I don't like playing a game, I'm not interested. So there might be the best game out there in the world, but if I personally didn't have fun with it, I'm not publishing it. So perhaps that's the wrong way to go about doing this thing, but it's worked for me thus far. So I'm going to keep it up. So I played Embryo Machine. I was like, yep, that's the game. It was the second game on my list of like 5 games that I wanted to check out as being one of our first projects in 2021. Because at that point, my 2020 schedule was already filled. It was my second game that I played, and I didn't even bother playing the final 3 right away, because I just knew, like, all right, it's like when you have to pick out a birthday card for someone, like there's so many that you could choose from. It's kind of like, I'm just going to pick the one that first makes me laugh. That's what it was with Embryo Machine. It's like, I'm going to pick the first one that gives me that feeling of this is it. And it gave me that feeling of this is it. So literally, I was so impressed with the game. The next day, I did a cold email to Kazaic saying, hey, so I want your game. Here's who we are. This is what we've done. This is what we do. This is kind of the mission. I don't know if anyone else has reached out to you about publishing the game, but hopefully they haven't, because I really want to publish this for the West. It would do really well out here. And they returned, they got back to me within 24 hours. Like, yeah, let's talk about this further. So the deal came together really quickly. The licensing deal was in place in like the first, if I'm remembering correctly, it was in place the first quarter of 2020. So I've known this was going to be a project that was happening, and we didn't start the localization process though until the end of Q3 of 2020, sometime around September, maybe August. And so we just got in there. We rolled up our sleeves. We got to work. I knew that I wanted it to be our Q1 Kickstarter, and here we are. We feel ready to go. Obviously, the game isn't completely done yet. Usually we don't come to Kickstarter with a game 100% ready to go, but we bring games to Kickstarters that are very close to that. And Embryo Machine is actually probably the closest game we've brought to being 100% complete out of the 4 that we've Kickstarted thus far. And I say 4, we actually, if you go to like our Kickstarter page, we only have 3 listed. We co-published Testament. It was actually run under a different company's banner. So we've got 4 Kickstarter projects, but you'll see that we've only got 3 under our name. So that's Embryo Machine, and hopefully I didn't bore people too long with that exposition.
So
far, go ahead, Alex.
When it comes to, I guess, making an already made game, do you have to redo a lot, or does the main company just share their files and their art that you get to now print? Like, is everything basically the same, or do you resize some things? And I guess my big question is, so are there mini mechs, or are there mechs on the field, or are they visualized in a different way?
Yeah, so there are mini mechs on the field.
Nice.
Hold on, let me make sure my wording is clear. There are mechs that are mini in size, not there are miniature mechs, as in there are not mechs that are placed on the map via miniatures pieces. But yes, so you're actually moving these pieces around the map. They're cardboard standees that come in the base tier. And we're not ready to reveal what's in the higher tiers just yet, but there are some deluxe pieces that will be available to folks. Okay. So yeah, you're actually you're sort of piloting those mechs around a physical space, which is unlike anything we've done before. But yeah, to the first part of your question, so the localization process is always complicated, no matter your genre, no matter your medium. And for board games, it's no different. What's interesting about localization when it comes to the Japanese language in specific is the Japanese language says in much fewer characters than what English says. So in English, it takes us much longer to say something than it does in Japanese. Mm-hmm. So a sentence in Japanese might be 7 characters long, but in English, that same sentence is 25 characters long. And as you can imagine, that presents quite a dilemma when you're working with a confined space like a card or a rule book. And so certainly part of doing a quality localization job is ensuring that you're presenting a product that makes sense and is approachable to your new audience. Like, I'm not doing a good job as a localization company if English readers don't feel like they're reading something that could be in native English. So I think of it as if someone reads one of our rule books and they say to themselves, oh, I can tell this was translated from another language, I've failed. And so part of that, yes, is getting the language right and making sure that the prose read well and all of that. But another part of it is making sure that the layouts make sense, because sometimes a layout in Japanese doesn't make exact sense if we use the same layout in English. So this could not have been more present than with our past project, Gun and Gun, which was by far the most challenging localization process and project that I've ever been a part of. And I'm talking beyond board games now. I was in video game localization for a long time. Gun and Gun was by far the most challenging project that I've been a part of, because that game used a lot of verticality. Sometimes the Japanese language can be read horizontally. But for board games, sometimes they choose to present the text in vertical format. Sometimes it's just a readability issue. Other times it's a stylistic issue. Gun and Gun is an extremely stylish game. And they made sure to squeeze every ounce of style that they could out of that original Japanese release. And so that meant that they used a lot of kanji, and they used a lot of vertical text. Now, kanji in and of itself sometimes is just one character, but it represents a word or more. And so you can imagine that cards with limited real estate being presented with giant kanji may not exactly present itself all that well to an English reader when you then have to extrapolate that kanji and make it into an English sentence and still maintain the styling of a really stylish looking card game. I mean, that's part of Gun and Gun's appeal, is its style. And so it is not a one-to-one process. So when the designers hand over their files, when we get to that point in the process, I wish it was as easy as, all right, cool, we can do a one-to-one translation and we'll be fine. One-to-one translation with our words, with our layouts. But so often that's not the case. Now, in Embryo's case, actually that was the case. This Embryo was sort of the opposite of Gun and Gun in that it was one of the easier localization projects that I've been on, because a lot of the text was already presented in a way that would be naturally readable to an English audience, and it already used some English in its assets. So it was a fairly breezy project coming from Gun and Gun.
Looking at Embryo Machine right now, just to kind of like put it into perspective, you mentioned that you've done 4 on Kickstarter. The first one that shows up on the LionWing kind of the created page. Please excuse my butchering the Sinome.
Yep.
Oh, nailed it.
You got closer than 100% of other people.
Coliseum, our English edition. According to this, there were 293 backers, fully funded on Kickstarter. Put that in perspective, currently right now, Embryo Machine hasn't even launched yet. Over 1,000 people are currently anticipating that launch. The notify me, I didn't even know this was a thing. But there's over 1,000 people currently waiting for Embryo Machine to launch on Kickstarter. So it goes to show that even just in the past year, people have noticed what you're doing. The products that you're putting out, people, the quality is there, the playability is there. People are psyched, which I think is rad, especially in a time where over the last year, it's been difficult. I admittedly haven't been playing a lot of board games. There has been some, like virtual tabletop, like D&D, stuff like that. But the actual like physical board games that I've been trying to collect over the last couple of years are collecting dust this year, which is unfortunate. How has pandemic affected your business? Is it tough to play test? Has it really hit you at all, or is it just head down, power through it?
Yeah, it hasn't impacted us in the way that I thought it was going to. I mean, we're mostly a remote company anyway, so everyone's always communicating digitally. Now, it has impacted our ability to play test in a physical space, because normally I would play test locally. That obviously has not been able to happen. And so playtesting has had to take place via Discord, in cameras, and Tabletop Simulator. And so it is a little different. And certainly the pandemic has had huge economic ramifications. And so that clearly trickles down to the board game market as well. And at the same time, the board game market is doing as good as it's ever done. 2020 was actually a huge year for the board game market, especially on Kickstarter. And I think at the beginning we were all thinking like, oh shit, what's going to happen here? But we sort of saw, our worst fears not come to fruition in that regard, not see a collapse of the industry, but we've actually seen the industry sort of thrive. And I think that's because a lot of folks have realized, hey, you know what? These companies don't have conventions any longer as a means of surviving. So if I'm able to, if I have the privilege to, I'm going to support these folks who are now turning to Kickstarter to ensure that they're able to keep the lights on and keep running. I think people don't want their favorite board game companies to shut down because of a pandemic. I mean, that's kind of across the board. People don't want their favorite companies in general to shut down. That's why there's been such a push for, shop local, in a lot of communities. And I think that sort of mentality is also transferred over to the board game community. And I mean, I don't have to look any further than the 3 Kickstarters that we ran in 2020 to say, they still want board games, even though we now have to approach playing board games differently. Since we can't gather around, the table with 6 people, people still want to support those things, and people are itching to get those games in preparation for when we are able to return to some semblance of normalcy again. And so the pandemic has definitely had its effects, and it's had its impacts on the industry, and it's had its impacts on LionWing. And at the same time, I think a lot of companies have said, all right, this is the hand we've been dealt. Let's just try to play it the best we could. And I mean, that was my mentality going into, quarter 2 of 2020. We realized like, this is a thing. How do we adjust to this? Especially as I was sort of transitioning to LionWing, not so much as a side gig any longer, but as a full-time thing. And it was like, I got to make this work. And so, we did the best that we could. But yeah, you're right. To look at something like Sonoma Coliseum, which had sub 300 backers, to then, look at Embryo Machine's lander page, to be approaching 1,100 folks with still over 2 weeks to go before we launch. We're in a good place right now, and I think part of it is because we've built a brand and all of that, and part of it is I'd like to think that we're putting out games that people want to play. Part of it is I actually have a marketing plan now, which I did not have when I launched Sonoma. Literally no marketing. I didn't tell anyone about it. I don't even know if I sent out a press release about it. I think I just launched it and was like, okay, that's what I do, right? I just launched the thing.
Now people give me money.
And yeah, right. That's how it happens. And, fortunately that's how it happened, but it happened on a very small scale. So now I actually have a marketing plan in place, and I have a marketing person, who takes care of those things. But, through 2020, since it was such a terrible year, it dawned on me that as a board game company, I do have sort of the unique position to like bring joy to people's lives. And so, that was never lost on me, and it still isn't lost on me that, people might think like, oh, you make board games, that's really trivial, go get a real job. To me, it's like, well, I'm making people happy with games, and like that, like you can't, like that shit you can't buy, like, real joy, and enjoying something isn't easy to come by, especially right now. And if I can play a part in that, and if it's through board games, I will gladly play that part, and I'm happy to do so.
I don't think I know anyone who hasn't had the thought of, oh man, I can't wait to have friends again.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. It's the impact that just a game night, can have is, at least this year has shown me how much I relied on my friends, and not being able to do that has definitely been a huge bummer. But if anything, it's allotted me time to collect more games, so now I can bother the absolute shit out of my friends once all this is over, because it just, having that gameplay and like experiencing it I remember the first time me and some friends of ours of the show, Joe and Colin, I'd grabbed Pandemic because everyone talks about Pandemic, and not the actual the game Pandemic, and I just wanted
everyone talked about both, I think, the actual Pandemic and the game.
Exactly. Yeah, this is a couple 2 or 3 years ago, but I snagged it and I brought it over. None of us had ever played it, so it was definitely a learning experience. And again, it goes to show how difficult your job is, because the game, everything's, it's for us, and even everything being in English, we still missed a very crucial rule. And halfway through the game, we were like, man, we're flying. We're killing this game. Turns out we weren't doing it right. And then as soon as we started to play with the actual correct rules in place, we got annihilated. Anyways, where I'm going with that. Excuse me. It's when you get that game and when you have, especially when it's one that everyone enjoys and it's just a blast, it's hard to even put into words like that experience. And it may seem kind of it's trivial at this point with the popularity and then all the stuff that happened over the last year with everything that their accusation. But like, I still remember the first time we played Cards Against Humanity in a hotel room in Boston, and I was like almost throwing up from laughter. You know, it's just that memory that's always going to be with me. You know, it's just gaming provides such a connection to your friends and even people that you've never even met before. Like at PAX, like we've met people playing games at demos, and it can just be so much fun.
Yeah, man. I mean, games have the ability to create forever memories. And like, you can't say that about a lot of stuff in life. And I'm not even sure it's necessarily the games that are doing it. I think it's sitting around a table, like being in the company of like other human beings face to face and just enjoying something together. And perhaps the conduit just happens to be games, though I'd like to think as a board game company, like the game does have something to do with it. But you're right. Like that's something you will likely remember for the rest of your days. And that's super important. That's special. It's like, I mean, not to sound like all existential, but like as a human being, like we need those memories.
Yeah. Yep. Especially at times like these, it also helps get through. Like once this is over, man, I'm having all my friends over every day and we're playing all the games just because we have a year to make up for, you know. It's
every day, all day until you hate them.
Yeah, that's the way it's going to be. So I'm curious, Matt, because you seem to be extremely passionate about what you do, which obviously it's your livelihood. But I want to know, man, like what got you into what got you into gaming? Like let's talk some favorites, some dream projects. And I'm firing out 18 questions right now, but I guess let's start. What got you into tabletop, man?
Yeah, so for the majority of my life, I was a video game person. That's what I grew up with. In my teen years, I think that's when I kind of discovered, card games and that kind of thing, and really fell in love with the tabletop medium. But as I graduated high school, went to college, et cetera, I didn't know a lot of people who played them, and so it got kind of put on the back burner. And this is sort of a unique story. I've told it before, but I think it's unique enough to tell again. Like 6 years ago, I had experienced. Sounds really weird, but I was having like crazy wrist pain, and it was getting in the way of my ability to play video games. And I realized like this pain was so excruciating that I couldn't keep playing video games, at least not in the way that I always had, which, was sort of like binging on video games, long gaming sessions, that kind of thing. I realized I couldn't do that anymore. I was officially old, and my body was like, yo, dude, you're old. Your wrist can't take it anymore. It's been like 2.5 decades of you just beating the hell out of us. Take a break. But I realized like, all right, so I gotta like find another hobby. And it was in that moment that I was like, you know what? Let me get back into tabletop games. Let's see what that does for me right now at this point in my life. And the floodgates just opened. I got back into it, and it was like, this is what I've been missing. This is amazing. I love video games, and they give me good feelings, but they give me different feelings than a tabletop game does. Connection that we just talked about. And so I went from like loving video games to pretty much exclusively playing those for a number of years to, all of a sudden my resurgence of loving tabletop games. And that's when I was like, you know what, I want to do something with this. I was in localization for video games at the time too. And I was like, you know what, I think I can parlay my video game localization experience into localization in the tabletop industry. No one's localizing all of these rad games out of Japan and out of Asia. Someone should do that. And I was like, why isn't that someone just me? Oh, that actually should be me. I should do that right now. But yeah, so I guess that's kind of like that's my trajectory with tabletop games. But I remember even being in high school, being smitten with tabletop games, and like just like creating tabletop games, silly games that were probably trash with my friends. And so, but yeah, so I've liked them for a good chunk of my life, but it hasn't been until the last probably 6 years that I've really gone full in on it. Now,
games, what comes to mind?
All the ones that I've published. No,
of course,
naturally. This question's always so hard for me, because it almost feels like my answer will change depending on my mood in the day, depending on what I've recently played. I'll have some recency bias, and I'll say like my favorite game is the one that I played last night. Like, oh yeah, I just played Aventuria last night. That's my favorite game. But I mean, I guess if you pin me down, like gun to my head, you have to choose right now what's your favorite game. I would fold to the pressure and say Summoner Wars. From Plat Hat Games. I love Summoner Wars. And that was one of those games that came along way late in life. Like I had played so many tabletop games long before Summoner Wars. And yet Summoner Wars is that game that, like you talked about that memory that you had a couple years ago when you're playing Cards Against Humanity. I have those types of memories with Summoner Wars. And I think that's probably why it's my favorite game, because I have the strongest memories associated with it. Really good memories that I hope will last me a lifetime. So I would say that's probably my favorite game, at least like my favorite English game, because there are so many games that have never been released in English, especially that I've played over the past 3 years, where I'm like, this is so good, and no one that I know knows about this game.
Do you have any games in your own head that you would like to develop yourself someday, or are you just into translating other products and bringing them to the States?
You know what? Okay, so I have designed a game. It's been on the back burner for a while now, but I will never be as brilliant as the designers of the games that I've published thus far. And so being a localization studio has certainly realized, like, oh, actually, Bradley, like, yeah, you designed a game. You're not a game designer. Like, the people's works who were publishing, like, those are the real game designers. And I play their games and I'm like, yeah, they're the real game designers. I just dabble in it. So certainly, yeah, I mean, it would be great to design my own game and release it, but I'm so passionate about localization, and there are so many games out there that are worlds better than my own that people need to play. That's really kind of my focus, and that's my passion. And like, I formed LionWing so that I could shine a spotlight on all the games that people would never play. And I want to stay true to that mission for as long as I can. There are countless games coming out in Japan, in Asia, I mean, anywhere really. But since that's my market, I just focus on that. There's so many games coming out all the time there that to me, it's like, I don't got time for my own stuff. Like these games are good and I want people to play them. So maybe down the road at some point, but that's not in the cards anytime soon.
Well, I personally, it sounds like you know your stuff. It sounds like you're passionate about it. So I feel like if you have a game to make, man, I think you should. Once you have the opportunity, I think you should get on that. But again, it's really easy for me to sit on the outside and say, "Yeah, dude, you do all the work."
Right.
But as far as the kind of, I want to talk about for a quick second the kind of the culture. I subscribe to like the board gaming subreddit, which is a great place for finding new games, getting opinions, and all pretty much everything that comes along with board games. I do sometimes see there can be, as with any community, a little bit of negativity, a little bit of elitism. If
not on the internet, not on the internet. What are you talking about?
If you go to the board game subreddit and you say, "Man, I like Cards Against Humanity," or "I had a blast playing Exploding Kittens," for the most part, people are gonna be like, "Cool, good for you." But then you're also gonna get some people who are like, play a real game. What you need to play Terraforming Mars for the next 12 hours. And
yeah, play this Euro. Then you're a real gamer.
Exactly. Yeah. The gatekeeping and the elitism, it can be rough, but again, you get that in everything, and it seems to be in the minority from what I can see. What are your thoughts on the current tabletop meta? Do you have any likes and dislikes when it comes to what people are putting out there these days?
Yeah, so I do have things that I like and things that I don't really care for. So there are certain trends in gaming right now that I'm really on board with, and you could probably see it in two of our projects, which are co-op games. So I really love co-op games.
Same.
So,
Yep.
so anytime that I see a good co-op game, especially a co-op game that has some level of persistence to it, I mean, I don't need a full legacy system. I don't need I don't need a Gloomhaven or even a Descent to enjoy a co-op game. It could be something like Aeon's End, which I adore. But as long as there's a co-op, as long as the game is a co-opper and it's got some strong RPG mechanics to it, I really love that. And so that's been a huge thing, especially in 2020, as people realize like, oh, well, like we can't get around the table and play competitively in the way that we used to anymore. I think a lot of companies turn to co-opers because a lot of co-op games offer solo, solitaire modes as well. Mm-hmm. So I really am into that trend because I would say that's a trend right now. And hopefully it's not just a fleeting trend. Hopefully it sticks around. And I mean, co-op board games have been around since the dawn of board games, but really like co-op games have really flourished lately. And so I hope that continues. I hope the trend of solo games continue. I'll tell you what. So I remember there was a time when I was mocked for saying that I loved playing board games by myself. People were like, I heard all the usual stuff like, loser, like get friends. That's what board games are for. And yes, board games definitely, there are board games and a lot of board games. And part of the board game experience is about being in the company of other people like we talked about. But sometimes I also just want the experience of a board game, and I want to do it on my own time. I want to sit at my kitchen table with a beer, and I want to pour over a game and take my time, and I want to have a 4-hour endeavor where it's just me looking at card text, strategizing how I'm going to overcome this AI. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really into the solo aspect, which too has found a lot of traction in 2020 and probably will continue through 2021. I wish solitaire games were bigger, but I think it's becoming a little bit more mainstream for there to be games, not just with solo modes, but games that are strictly solo experiences. I hope that continues. I'm not huge on like worker placement and that kind of thing. I'm not huge on like Euros. It's not really my thing. I definitely respect what they do. I'm glad they exist, and I'm stoked that people love them. It just personally isn't, necessarily like the thing I go to. I will play one if it's in front of me. But certainly if you put me in front of a shelf with all these games and they're lined up, the Euro or the worker placement is probably the game I'm going to pick last. So fortunately, I think, worker placement was like a huge subcategory of games a couple of years ago, and we're still seeing tons of worker placement games, don't get me wrong. But that trend isn't as prominent as it was probably in, let's say, 2017. It's still there, obviously. But that's not something that I love. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but that's kind of how I heard the question.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was getting at. Because I'm totally with you on I love co-op. I love it so much. Maybe it's just because I'm not an ultra competitive person, or I'm just historically mediocre at things. So when I compete against my friends, I'm usually not the one who wins. So if we're playing co-op, no, we all win or we all lose. But it's that's pretty much what I was going for. And it's just like I said, man, it just seems like you're so passionate about it. And the scene has just exploded so much, at least even in just the last couple of years. It's even, looking at PAX, there's the games that you can rent, and they release like statistics on like the PAX subreddit after every show. And it's like, oh, hey, you're the top 10 most checked out board games, and like for the most part, like it's a lot of the stuff that you'd kind of expect, but it's also like, oh hey, this game that I've never heard of was checked out like 600 times over the course of a weekend. What is this? And there's just so much out there. There's just like there's something for everyone, whether it's a game that you can pick up at like Ticket to Ride, which I love that game. It's just it's basic, but it's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun playing with my family with it. And like I said, I guess I'm just rambling now because I just like games, and I encourage anyone who isn't into tabletop or isn't into board gaming to give it a shot.
Yeah, I think it's a cool medium because there is a lot of diversity. I often compare it just in my own head to video games. If a video game isn't an open world sandbox RPG with roguelike elements, then you are like a weird video game these days. Whereas the board game industry feels a lot less homogenous. There are a lot of experiences out there now. There are a lot of designers with brilliant ideas doing stuff to pre-established formulas and creating brand new formulas that just is so exciting. It's so cool to see people come up with new ideas or put just a small spin on an old one that totally changes the complete vibe and feel of a genre. I love that. And I think it can only be accomplished in tabletop games. And you might say like, well, you can also do that in any other game medium. And perhaps that's true, but I just feel like there's a lot of experimentation in this industry. Yes, there's always room for more, but that's part of what I like about the industry so much is, sometimes when I look at my own shelf and I look at my own buying trends, I'm like, I don't have a lot of games that are super similar. They might occupy the same genre space, but that's it. And I really do love that. I just think that's super cool about this industry.
While we kind of get toward the end of our episode here, I did want to make sure that everyone has a chance to kind of find where they can find your work. So we've mentioned the Kickstarter coming up. Obviously, you can find that on Kickstarter. The game's been mentioned a couple times. It's going to be Embryo Machine. It's again LionWing Publishing. You can go and get on the notification list. Again, almost 1,100 people, which is insane. Bradley, where can people go if they want to find more LionWing, if they want to find more of your work?
Yeah, certainly. So you can find us on social. It's the same handle across the board. That's at LWing Publishing. You can also check us out, lionwingpublishing.com. And then, of course, you can find us on Kickstarter as well, and Board Game Geek. You can just type in LionWing Publishing under the search category, under the publisher's domain, and there we will be. And yeah, so we're very active on social media. We have a fledgling Discord that's really blown up lately, where there's always some kind of communication happening there on a daily basis. And I mean, that's part of what I wanted to do with LionWing is I wanted to make sure that I built a community around our games to give folks a space to not only just talk about LionWing games, but to talk about any games and to talk about any subject at all. I mean, half the time we're talking about anime in our Discord. We know, there'll be days on it where we don't talk about board games at all. We're just talking about anime or some sort of obscure Japanese figurine that we just got in the mail from Amazon Japan. Community was super important to me because I do recognize the importance of, human connection, especially now more than ever. But so you can check out our Discord. You can find that link at lionwingpublishing.com or on our social media. We oftentimes tout the link to that.
Feel free to plead the fifth on this one. The schedule for 2020 seemed pretty crazy, putting out pretty much like a game every quarter almost. Does LionWing have plans to keep that schedule going for 2021?
It will be a busy 2021. I will say that much. There will be some stuff that folks will not have expected from us, and there may be some non-Kickstarter stuff coming as well, which will be a first for us.
Excellent. So, I debated asking about that. It seems like you've been gathering this loyal customer base. Whether Kickstarter was we like doing that, we're going to go with that all the time, or if there were ever plans to just have the LionWing shop.
Yeah, so in the beginning I said we are a Kickstarter company, and that has been true up until now. And we will continue to have a large Kickstarter presence. But at this point, I also want to expand our horizons a little bit. And so we will be opening up a new online store with a pre-order campaign for something. It won't be a Kickstarter campaign, obviously. This is a much smaller game, but we will be doing a pre-order campaign, which will come with a bunch of incentives, almost like a Kickstarter would provide incentives to backers. We'll be doing kind of the same thing with our own shop. So there's some really exciting stuff on the horizon, both how we're going to deliver those games, but then also the games and the genres and subgenres of the industry that those games will occupy.
Mm-hmm. That is very exciting to hear. Bradley, it sounds like the sky's the limit for LionWing. I can't wait to see what you guys come out with next. Best of luck on the Embryo Machine project. Looks like it's going to be a banger just from the people who are following along already. But again, I hope that maybe we can break your record. It looks like your other project, the Wild Hunt Festival, was funded in 3 hours, according to the badge on that one.
Yeah, yes, indeed. That was a good one. It's for Embryo Machine because it's a much heavier game in pretty much all senses of the word heavy. The ask will be a little bit higher because there are way more components, and the components are of a top quality. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with if we're lucky enough to fund, and then how quickly that happens.
Absolutely, Bradley. I got to say thank you for doing this. This has been a blast to talk about. Again, the passion and just you got a good way of talking about games, man, and it just makes me I just want to see my friends and I want to play. Thank you for coming on and doing this with us. Really appreciate it. This has been great.
Yeah, no, thanks guys for having me. It's been a fun conversation, and hopefully we can do it again.
Go check out LionWing Publishing. Find the Kickstarter, find the socials, just go support gaming in general. It's just a good time. That is going to do it for this week. So until next time, I have been JR.
I'm Alex.
Bradley.
And this has been episode 420 of Opinions May Vary. Hey everyone, if you liked that episode, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Opinions May Vary, and on Twitter and YouTube at OMV Podcast. You can also find us on Spotify or on our very own website at omvpodcast.com. And if you're looking for merch, we have stickers and pins available over at omvpodcast.bigcartel.com while supplies last. As always, thank you so much for listening. Let us know what you thought in the comments, and we will see you next time.